and you deliver every time. He tells you to go after James Comey, Letitia James, Lisa Cook, and Jerome Powell.
Before a single formal question was asked, before any witness offered testimony, and before the Attorney General had the chance to settle into her prepared talking points, Representative Jamie Raskin changed the tone of the entire hearing. Instead of easing into criticism or carefully building toward a conclusion, he opened with a blunt accusation. Speaking directly to Attorney General Pam Bondi, and with survivors seated just behind her, he declared that the Department of Justice was presiding over what he described as a sweeping failure in handling the Epstein matter. It was not framed as speculation. It was not presented as a theory to be tested over hours of questioning. It was delivered as a conclusion, right at the start. That choice alone shifted the atmosphere in the room. The House Judiciary Committee hearing on February 11, 2026 had already drawn significant attention. The chamber was filled to capacity. Members of the press crowded the gallery. Observers lined the walls. Directly behind Bondi sat a group of women dressed in white, survivors connected to the Epstein case. Their presence was quiet but powerful. They did not speak. They did not interrupt. But they were there to witness how the nation's top law enforcement official would address questions surrounding one of the most disturbing criminal networks in modern memory. Chairman Jim Jordan opened the proceedings according to standard procedure. Bondi was sworn in and delivered prepared remarks. She focused on violent crime statistics, border security, and economic indicators. She did not reference Epstein. She did not directly address the survivors in the room. She maintained a forward gaze throughout her statement. Then Raskin spoke. Rather than methodically walking through documents or building an argument piece by piece, he began with a direct assertion that the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files reflected serious institutional failure. He warned that history would judge leadership based on how it responded to victims and whether accountability was pursued with consistency and transparency. The weight of that framing was immediate. It was not merely a policy disagreement. It was presented as a moral question about whether justice had been pursued with equal intensity for the powerful and the vulnerable. Observers noted the silence that followed. Reporters paused mid-keystroke. Cameras focused tightly on Bondi's expression. The survivors behind her remained composed and still. The moment felt unusual because ranking members typically build toward accusations. They do not begin with them. Raskin's strategy suggested something else. That in his view, the evidence was already sufficient and the hearing would test how the Attorney General responded when confronted with it. He continued by describing what he saw as systemic shortcomings. He referenced the release of Epstein-related files in which victims' names were reportedly exposed, while certain identifying details tied to alleged perpetrators were redacted. He cited concerns raised by attorneys representing survivors. He emphasized the scale of harm, noting that more than 1,000 individuals had been identified as victims connected to the broader network. His language was sharp, describing the situation as reflecting either profound incompetence or troubling indifference. He argued that the pattern of decisions created the perception that powerful figures were shielded while survivors faced renewed exposure. The tone was deliberate. This was not legal phrasing alone. It was moral language designed to resonate beyond procedural debate. He closed his opening remarks by characterizing the department's actions as performative transparency, suggesting that while steps were taken publicly, the underlying results failed to deliver accountability. The phrase would quickly circulate in news coverage as the defining line of the hearing. When Bondi responded, she did not directly concede any of the central accusations. Instead, she emphasized that aspects of the Epstein investigation predated her tenure and spanned multiple administrations. She argued that oversight regarding document releases involved complex legal constraints and long-standing processes. Some lawmakers countered that regardless of history, the current leadership bore responsibility for present outcomes. They pressed for explanations regarding specific document handling decisions and the absence of additional prosecutions. At times, the exchange grew tense. Bondi defended the department's record and rejected the characterization that it was shielding anyone. She also pushed back forcefully against critics, suggesting some members were politicizing the issue. Throughout the exchange, the survivors remained seated behind her. Their presence became part of the visual narrative, frequently referenced by members of the committee who argued that transparency required acknowledgement of those directly harmed. Representative Pramila Jayapal directly asked Bondi to address the survivors and offer reassurance that their privacy and safety were priorities moving forward. Bondi responded that the department's procedures aimed to balance transparency with legal obligations and maintained that any errors were not intentional. Representative Thomas Massey, a Republican who had supported legislation requiring document release, expressed concern about how certain names were handled. He referenced communications from victims' attorneys and questioned how redaction decisions were made. The hearing evolved into a broader debate about prosecutorial discretion, transparency standards, and whether systemic reforms were necessary to restore trust. Supporters of Bondi argued that critics were oversimplifying a complicated legal process involving sealed records, privacy protections, and evidentiary standards. They contended that many investigative steps remained ongoing and could not be discussed publicly. Critics maintained that the absence of additional charges and the manner of file releases reinforced public suspicion that accountability had stalled. What made Raskin's opening statement so impactful was not simply its content, but its structure. By presenting the accusation first, he forced every subsequent exchange into a defensive posture. Each deflection to prior administrations sounded, to critics, like avoidance. Each emphasis on procedural limits appeared to them like confirmation that structural problems persisted. From a strategic standpoint, it was a high-risk approach. If unsupported, it could have appeared hyperbolic. But because concerns about the Epstein case have lingered for years across party lines, the claim resonated with viewers already skeptical of institutional transparency. The documented facts cited during the hearing included the release of files with contested redactions, the limited number of prosecutions tied directly to the network beyond Ghislaine Maxwell, and ongoing disputes between victims' counsel and the department regarding information disclosure. These were not invented controversies. They were matters of public record debated in committee. The larger question underlying the hearing was whether justice systems can investigate powerful networks without fear or favor. That question extends beyond any single administration. By the end of the session, it was clear that Raskin's opening had defined the narrative. Media coverage centered not on Bondi's prepared remarks, but on the accusation of institutional concealment and the Attorney General's refusal to accept that framing. Whether one agreed with Raskin's language or Bondi's defense, the exchange revealed a deeper issue. Public confidence in the handling of the Epstein case remains fragile. Survivors seek closure. Lawmakers seek clarity. Citizens seek assurance that influence does not shield wrongdoing. The hearing did not resolve those tensions. It amplified them. Raskin's supporters viewed his opening statement as a necessary articulation of frustration long simmering among victims and advocates. Bondi's defenders viewed it as a partisan escalation that risked undermining confidence in the justice system. What cannot be denied is that the moment altered the dynamic in the room. From that point forward, the hearing was no longer a routine oversight session. It became a referendum on credibility, on whether the Department of Justice could convincingly demonstrate impartial pursuit of truth in one of the most notorious criminal cases of the century. As the gavel eventually closed the session, the central tension remained unresolved. The accusations were on the Congressional record. The defenses were also documented. The survivors had witnessed every word, and the broader public was left to decide which narrative felt more consistent with the evidence. A department constrained by complexity and legal limits, or one that has yet to fully answer lingering questions about accountability. In that sense, the opening minutes achieved what Raskin intended. They ensured that the debate over transparency and justice in the Epstein case would not fade quietly from view.